All right, so why don't we dive in? We can't start talking about enterprise AI unless we really set what the landscape is, and each of you have a very unique perspective given the businesses that you're running. Just to start, I would love to really understand what is the state of enterprise AI. If you believe Gartner, Gartner says less than 10% of businesses have agentic AI deployed today, and by 2030, that'll be over 80%. Based off of your perch, looking to the enterprise, do you agree with that? Do you think it's less? Does it match up with what you're seeing? And what you're seeing work for what you're seing enterprises do with AI? Why don't we start with Duncan?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think it sounds rough and tumble, right, to me. It feels like in the last year or two, I think a lot of enterprises have done a lot of pilots, done a lot of experimentation, maybe have one or two agents in production, but have struggled a little bit with how do we scale that out and up, like breadth and depth. And I think a lot of that speaks to you need a lot more than just a really good model to do that. A lot of the things that like the last three of us have all touched on different areas of it. So, but I have a lot of optimism that we are really figuring those things out right now, and you can feel that acceleration starting to take off. So 80% in 2030 doesn't seem unachievable to me.
How about you?
Yeah, mine is probably a little bit self-selected cohort that I talk to. So I'm definitely seeing a lot of adoption, especially when the organizations have figured out their data governance and security posture, they're able to move faster. So I talk to a lot of those customers, learn from them, and then help the customers who are figuring it out. They could be figuring it out on how to train the people to use this, or how to train their internal compliance teams on where they can accept risk and where they want to move forward faster. So for me, from my perspective, I'm seeing a lot of adoption. Use cases vary. So depending on the risk acceptance and tolerance level, I'm seeing good amount of adoption.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say we're seeing a lot of customers at different parts of the adoption curve, but broadly speaking, I'd say 2025 maybe was the year of experimentation, still trying to figure out whether this thing work, how much is the hallucination rate, what is it that you're getting in terms of accuracy, can you really trust the outcome. 2026 has been more the year of really proving ROI and seeing that AI actually is driving ROI at scale. And then as we are going towards the rest of the year, I see more and more really using AI for true business transformation. So I'd say broadly, I agree with the direction, though I would say the exact percentage isn't really, I think, relevant, whether it's 70% or 90%. I don't think the number of agents is really the right metric to look at, but really, like, what's the true business value that you're ultimately getting from using these agentic AI solutions? And more and more, we are seeing customers, as you mentioned, with the right data foundation, with the right security and governance in place to get into that direction.
Adarsh?
Yeah, I would say that I think so far, enterprise AI adoption has been underwhelming, but that trend will change very, very quickly, and we're already seeing it in 2026. And there's two reasons for that. One is largely a willingness thing, which is that for the past 10 years, automation and business transformation has just been pitched in different forms, everything from BPO, task mining, process mining. So there's just a long, there's like a big graveyard of failed pilots and initiatives there. So I've noticed that a lot of enterprise executives are a little bit hesitant about AI transformation because it's one of those things, at least initially. And then the second thing is just a capability problem where the models just weren't good enough until very recently. I think the big shift is towards the agentic paradigm where it's no longer models for chat use cases, it's models for essentially being a coworker, which means managing many different stakeholders, data sources, and delivering economically valuable work output versus being a personal assistant. So I'm optimistic about that 10% number or whatever number going up very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there are kind of two things. First, the definition of adoption itself. I think there's a lot of token maxing, a lot of people using AI as personal agents, as Rao was talking about. I don't quite think, that should be considered the enterprise adoption because a lot of those projects are failing or low ROI. But if you look deeply at true kind of workflow end-to-end automation, I think the 10% number is probably right, but it's growing fast, much faster than I would have expected. In fact, in Fortune 2000, there is a real appetite now to go and kind of agentically transform their businesses. So that's the first thing. I'm actually more optimistic. I think we may hit that 80% number even earlier than 2030. The second point is, it's not where the adoption actually stops It's not so much technical anymore. It was technical, I think, last year, a few years back. It's 70% reason is organizational. It's the change management, it's security, infosec, fear of like unknown, and so on. So I think if we can kind of cross that chasm of organizational resistance, so to say, we'll see faster adoption.
So Sergey, you make an interesting point. What does adoption mean? I think the other big question I have in AI is what does success look like? I mean, Anahita, you talked about ROI. I mean, when you're out there talking to enterprises, how are they measuring ROI? What's interesting to customers? Are they looking for additional revenue? Are they looking for cost savings? Is this really a question of employee productivity? Where do you think the most interesting value that's going to be created for AI is today that's resonating with enterprises?
I mean, ultimately, when we talk about ROI, we always say there are two ways that you deliver ROI. Either you help customers make more money or spend less money, right? Like, so you want to either increase productivity or help them deliver additional revenue. It is extremely difficult to get to that bottom line measurement. So companies are using a variety of metrics.
All right, let's try. We'll try going to a different panelist then, until we can get Anahita's mic working again. So Duncan, maybe you could talk a little bit about how do you all measure ROI and success within HubSpot, and are you sharing that with enterprises that you're bringing AI to?
We try to really stay focused on, here comes the new boss, same as the old boss, which is outcomes. At the end of the day, really understanding specifically what are the business outcomes we're trying to drive. Like, we can look across, say, the go-to-market journey and identify whether it is, a new qualified lead into the top of the funnel, it is a closed won deal, it is a customer support ticket resolved successfully for the customer. And that brings a level of clarity to how we build, obviously agents under that to deliver those. It also lets you turn it into a metric, because if you can't measure it, you're not going to be able to measure success at all. And we found that to work very well and basically paint the picture for our customers of what's the core high-level outcomes are across the journey, and then you can start filling in the pieces along the way.
I want to bring it back to Anahita now that hopefully her mic is working.
Yes, I believe this one is working. Okay. We were talking about how do we measure ROI, and I mentioned that ultimately you want to measure the impact on the bottom line, but it's very difficult because when you make an improvement in one of your workflows, measuring what gets you there to ultimately to the bottom line takes time, right? So companies are using a variety of leading indicators, whether it started with adoption and token consumption, which was certainly not a good use of, ROI, token maxing, as Surajit suggested. But now it's more and more we are seeing measurements of like the length of workflow. Has it gotten shorter? I'll give you an example. One of the agents that we built, for example, shortened our quarterly reporting from 2 weeks to 48 hours, or our earnings prep from weeks of work to just a couple of hours of work, or customer preparations from weeks to minutes. So that's how we are starting to measure productivity at the workflow level. But I expect as more and more we get to full automation and full workflow transformation, we should be able to see full impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, I think another key part of getting ROI out of AI is simply actually getting AI into production. And Adarsh, in your talk, you mentioned how most enterprises are actually failing in getting AI off the ground. Gartner says that 50% of Gen AI projects fail. In your experience, Adarsh, why is that? Is it a technology challenge? Is it the technology is not good enough? Or do you see it as an organizational adoption where this technology is so new, organizations are still figuring out how to actually deploy this?
Yes, I would say there's a couple of things. So the first one is just the actual confidence in the fact that the AI is performing the way you want it to. And our thesis there is just that most of these enterprises don't have robust evaluations that are agentic, meaning they have the task, the trajectory, the context, the artifact, and the verifier across all of it to make sure that you actually know the agent is doing what you want it to before it hits any production context. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, for AI adoption to be successful, you just can't hurl software over the fence. Like, it needs to come with change management, cultural changes, all of these different things. So it's actually a little bit involved, which is why you're seeing a lot of the labs spin up their own deploy codes with these FDEs and partners with these consultants and all of this sort of stuff, because doing a business transformation when your whole culture is like not AI forward, not technology forward, is really, really hard. And I anticipate that more of those involved end-to-end full-stack deployment efforts will increase the amount of AI adoption and successful pilots.
And Surajit, how about you? What's been your experience when you're talking to enterprises when it comes to actually helping them get AI off the ground?
Absolutely. So giving a real example, one of our customers, they have around 250,000 employees worldwide across 65 countries, and they implemented our AI employees for the entire hire to retire cycle process, like sourcing, recruiting, onboarding an employee, all of their IT need, ITSM type things, payroll questions, and also actually managing payrolls and so on. So AI employees taking actions, answering questions across around 70-odd use cases. And we did this over a course of 3 or 4 months for them. The impact, and this came from top down. So the impact is actually real. So from 1,000 employees, they had around 1,000 people in their HR ops team. They cut it down to almost 500 people. Okay. From 5 days to resolve an employee question to like 5 seconds or 10 seconds to average to resolve an employee question. So real actual productivity gain, real employee kind of happiness gain. So they see a 20% increase in employee satisfaction for all issues related to kind of employee issues, employee questions, and so forth. So I think this it kind of shows that if there is a will, it can happen, but it required, as others say, a lot of change management. The biggest change management was training their employees to kind of adopt to the new systems, new processes, rather than go back to the old systems. A very quick, funny anecdote, 30% of the queries the employees would do, and this is their CHRO told me, and this is companies called Wipro, they're a global professional services company, 30% request, the employees actually ask a human again, even though AI agents already answered or resolved the issue, resolved the ticket. So they were very curious, what is the issue? So they did some survey and focus groups. Apparently, employees didn't trust agents can actually do it. So they wanted a human to confirm, again, that this was correct. So over time, there's a lot of education involved in educating the employees to kind of adopt an agentic solution.
Yeah, I love that you brought up this question of trust. Do the users trust the AI? And there's also this question, should enterprises trust AI? Well, I mean, you talked about this in your talk. What do you make of the security challenges? Do you think AI is actually trustworthy today? Is it trustworthy, but we're still winning over enterprises are still convincing themselves that AI should be trusted and figuring out how to deploy AI securely? Would love to hear your thoughts there.
I definitely see it trustworthy. At the same time, trust but verify. Right? Coding became amazing because you're able to verify programmatically, or maybe even deploy another agent to verify. So the solutions where you're able to do this, both generate as well as verify, is where we are seeing accelerated adoption. I'll use a different example, sales. One of my customers, his focus is, I want my sales team just selling. Everything that they do before and everything that they do after, I want to be able to automate with agents. He's able to trust the AI to do the right research, to summarize the meeting prep, and use our notebook LM to create a podcast so that they can listen on their drive to the customer site. Right? So simplify all of that, and you're just having the conversation well prepared, have that conversation, and then post that, you're able to update the meeting, CRM, whatever you need to do. When there are solutions in place that can help you verify, we're able to trust much more. And it is also about the people's own journey in how they get to that stage of, this is providing enough value so I can take some risk here and I'll trust this content and then go with it.
Duncan, does that match up with your experience running security within HubSpot? How have the rough edges, how have you experienced the rough edges of AI, and how do you make sure that you're deploying AI securely for your enterprise customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two sides to it. Like on the one hand, models sophisticated as they are just weights and code. So like, you know, everything we've done for a long time around trust and safety and security, like those practices all apply, including things like understanding that different outcomes require different levels of trust and how we watch out for that, if you will, along the way. I think it's also interesting, though, that whilst we can take these frameworks that we've had and leverage them, you know, in the LLM world, on the other hand, a bunch of the conversation we've had here is all roads lead back to high-quality evals. And I think, and I 100% think that is true. The challenge that I think is underestimated is unlike a lot of other change management or previous tech transformations, even like the cloud or mobile, we were really coming up with a different way of doing things or accessing things that was very easy to grok. Like you could wrap your head around what it was. And I think that's much harder with this transformation. And so if you take evals, that's not just the new version of QA and test coverage. Like there's a skill around being able to write good evals, what a good high-quality golden sets look like. And so Mercor obviously does a ton of great work in this space. But that's a whole skill that people need to learn in order to be successful. And figuring out how we get people through that change, I think, is critical.
Yeah, I think evals is a great example, and actually leads into our next question, and I can open this up to the panel more broadly. I mean, besides evals, what are you seeing working for enterprises who are successfully deploying AI? Is there a specific use case? Is there a specific model architecture, one model, many models? Would love just to hear from y'all experience. What are you seeing as some of the early signs of success and what it takes to succeed with AI in the enterprise?
I can take it, unless you're... where we see most success today, a couple of areas. Of course, customer support, employee experience, employee support, which is kind of two sides of it, kind of support. We see a lot of examples of finance operations today, invoice processing, AP, AR, and data extraction, like basically document-related, document-heavy use cases, any document-heavy use cases. I'm expecting the surface area kind of continuously expand over time, right? So, and we are seeing that once we get into a large enterprise, they will ask for kind of more help in adjacent areas. In terms of architecture, everyone is realizing depending on a single model is not the way to go because the models are kind of getting better. There's a war of attrition on models, and I think the model layer is going to be commoditized. And open source models are getting better. So for us, for example, we use Emma Fusion, which blends 100+ models, all frontier models, many open source models, and customers can take advantage of that. But I think that it's some kind of model fusion is becoming standard architecture choice. Of course, I'll let others comment on other pieces.
Anahita, do you want to speak to that?
Maybe I can add to that a little bit. Yeah, so broadly, we're seeing it across multiple functions, across enterprises. As Surajit said, customer support is a very highly well-defined workflow that we have seen a lot of automation on that. Finance, similarly, well-defined workflows, especially quarter close, month close, all of those are like well-defined processes that needs to be followed, highly automatable. And we have seen a lot in go-to-market teams, sales, because they're the drivers of revenue. When you increase efficiency there, you increase your top line. Marketing, because they're huge budgets we are talking about. And then customer support and finance, as I mentioned, because those are like highly automatable solutions. But we're seeing it across different industries, across different verticals, and across different functions. Maybe one thing I'll also bring back on that trust question that you said. When we talk about trust, there are two elements that we primarily focus on. One is, can you trust that the data is accurate? And it's accuracy, basically. So for example, if I ask an agent, what was my Q1 revenue, there's only one correct answer. And this is not a trivial solution to a non-deterministic technology by nature. So putting the right guardrails and the right evals and the right definitions in place to ensure that you always get that accurate answer and that you can trust this is highly important for enterprise AI adoption. Because ultimately, if you want every employee to use these agents as opposed to humans, to get basic questions answered, you need to make sure that there is accuracy there 100% of the time. The other option is dashboards, which by default have that level of accuracy. The second one is governance. How do you ensure, especially for data agents, how do you ensure that the right people can have access to the right data and not beyond that? All right, when you're opening up access to your financial data across the organization, to your employee compensation data, to your performance data, how do you make sure that each sales account executive only gets access to the portion of revenue that they are supposed to see? How do you ensure that each manager sees the data for their own employees but not their peers? So those are the two elements that we focus on that I believe is non-negotiable for enterprise AI adoption.
Rao, you guys are probably working with some of the largest organizations in the world. What's the Google perspective? Where are you seeing some of the early takeoff with AI and any commonalities of success within your enterprise customers?
Yeah, it's a lot to do with the employee productivity, really stemming from finding the right information at the right time for what you're trying to do. Surfacing information is one thing, and then taking the action. What's the benefit policy on something to actually completing that action to enroll for it, right? So we are able to automate those extensively with the Gemini Enterprise product. And on the other extreme, CIOs are going deep. I use the sales team example, where they're able to automate every single task that a specific role is doing, and they're able to deliver that exceptionally well. Now, they're actually measuring sales productivity. Are they able to have more conversations, and are they able to close more deals faster? So aside from the usual employee delight and those kind of factors as well. So we're seeing it across the employee productivity as well as actual delivering business ROI.
So Anahita, I want to bring it back to something you said. Actually, it'll be a question for Adarsh, given what he was talking about earlier. But let's talk about data, and let's particularly talk about sovereign AI. Should enterprises keep their data? Should they share their data with frontier model providers? Should enterprises run their own models? I mean, the Palantir CEO recently argued that AI model companies, they pose a threat to most enterprises. Is that an overplayed geopolitical angle, or do you think sovereign AI actually matters to enterprises? I mean, Adarsh, you mentioned earlier how you guys are going to the enterprises, you're helping enterprises unlock using AI with their data. What do you view of sovereign AI? Do you think, when you look across the data layer, the model layer, confidential compute layer, what do you think it's okay for enterprises to share versus what should stay behind their firewall?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of moving parts to the question, but the first thing, which is like, how are enterprises going to harness their own data to make these model deployments work? I very much subscribe to the school of thought that every enterprise is definitionally idiosyncratic, right? Like even for two companies in the same space, McKinsey and Bain, like each of them have their own processes that make them special. And if they were exactly one-to-one the same, then neither of them would exist, right? There would only be one entity that subsumes both of them. So I think the implication for a lot of AI adoption and deployment is that the hardest part is encoding a lot of that unique secret sauce of the company, which is the workflows, processes, and organizational context, into the actual model weights or the harness. And it can be something as sophisticated as a way that an insurance company does underwriting, or we all know that like AI agents can review resumes, but you can't just deploy an agent to do that unless the agent knows what is the talent philosophy of that company, how do hiring managers of that company screen for resumes and stuff like that. So that, in general, the challenge of encoding the company's specific context and intelligence into the model, into the agent, I believe is very, very challenging to get right, and the most important thing for these deployments to go well. Now, the second point, which is about the sovereign AI, like what data is okay to share and so on and so forth, we work with a bunch of companies who are sharing what we call commodity workflows with the AI labs. So a lot of the AI labs are looking to just see how well the models can actually, like just improve model capability in real enterprise context. So for example, an IT function, right? Like if you want to make the agent really good at traversing all of the different parts of your IT stack, we can help anonymize the data, do the identity scrubbing, put it in an RL environment that's useful to the labs for training, and that's like typically a no-cost option for the average company because we can generate on the order of magnitude of 7 or 8 figures for them by monetizing their data very, very effectively. Now, the last thing, which is on the open weights stuff, I think there are going to be a bunch of use cases for private models. I think there's going to be a bunch of use cases for open source models because it hits the price performance curve a lot better. And the only way to figure out which one is right is evals. So
I'd love to get the model provider view on this. Rao, you
yeah.
are one of those model providers, not to put you on the spot,
yeah.
but do you think the Palantir CEO is correct? I mean, should enterprises be sharing their data with Google and other model providers? Yeah. Can they trust you all that you'll use the data in the right way and won't compete with them?
Yeah, you can absolutely trust Google. So building on what others are saying, right? So there is the enterprise data, but depends on whether you can give that data to the agent. It doesn't always need to be in the model, right? So you can give it in prompts, you can give it in context. I view it as the best context is the smallest context that gets the job done, right? So you actually can do a lot of things in a sovereign environment using a frontier model. You have all of that control. And obviously, the enterprise agreements that we have, we don't see the customer's data. So as an enterprise, that's a sacrosanct for us as well. Frontier models will continue to improve. And then customers understanding the cost, performance, and latency. And we always try to be the best on the Pareto chart. the customers do and will use a variety of models, and we try to provide all the flavors for it. You have the Gemini Pro, Flash, and Flashlight to find the right use case for the right model. That's on how enterprises can keep their data and still use frontier models. Coming back to the open source models, what that is doing today is it's eliminating the cost of training for an enterprise. But the cost of inference is still a cost, especially compared to a CPU and the newer workloads. You still have a much higher marginal cost when you're actually running the model. So as an enterprise, you have to ask yourself, am I willing to invest in that CapEx? Am I willing to invest in the people and the capabilities to grow that over time? Right? So there are multiple elements here to deal with when you're thinking open source does not solve everything. So you want to also think about the business aspects and the organizational expertise when you think about, am I doing it on my own?
So I love that you brought up open source again, and Surajit mentioned it earlier. So to close the panel out, I'd love to dive into this question on open versus closed. If you follow X, it seems like open source has won the hearts and minds of everybody on X. Is that what you're seeing within the enterprise? Do enterprises care about open versus closed? If you think about 5 years from now, who's going to win the model battle within the enterprise? Is it going to be open? Is it going to be closed? Is it going to be both? Maybe Duncan, you can start us off, given you've actually built and deployed AI systems. What's your view on open versus closed? What are you using internally, and do you think enterprise customers care about either?
I think at the end of the day, what enterprise customers care about is trust and reliability. And it's all about how do you solve for trust and reliability. And that probably means you don't want to have any single point of failure in the critical path if you think of it as an engineering system, like even as a business system. Yeah. So I think driving the right outcomes, which are going to be that balance of cost and performance and reliability and so forth. And there won't be a single thing that is the right one for any of those. So I think we'll absolutely continue to see a mix of those, and we'll get more sophisticated about the tooling that we use to be able to bring those to bear. And again, make sure we've got reliability without any single point of failure anywhere in the chain.
And Anahita, I'd love to get your view, because I know Snowflake has their own open models. You work with frontier model providers. What do you think the future of AI in the enterprise looks like?
We work with both, and I'd say the future is probably a combination of both. What we're seeing today is like frontier models so far has been, the more innovative models. They're a bit ahead of everybody else. They're pushing the boundaries of technology and innovation forward. Open source models give you better cost, brings more competition and increases innovation as a result of that, and gives you better auditability and visibility into what's happening under the hood. And I think for different workflows, you probably need different one of these models, right? Like if you're just simply summarizing an email, you probably don't need the most advanced reasoning model. Whereas there may be certain tasks for which you actually want the most advanced reasoning model. And so I'd say the future is really providing both of them to the customers and helping them dynamically route the queries to the right model. And that's what we're doing at Snowflake, providing that flexibility to the customers to optimize at the query level for the right model that they want to use for that specific use case.
And Surajit, I'm going to let you close it out, because you mentioned open source models. You said you think 40–50% of your internal work is open source. What's your view on where open source is headed versus frontier?
I agree with Anahita. I think the question is about, the strategic question is, can you change your model? It's not open source versus closed source. And if you change your model, do you need to change your entire stack? Will it break apart, fall apart? Do you need to code everything again? To build correctly, you should build in a way that you can change your model, or you have some kind of a model blender, model selector underneath your agentic orchestrator, so it can take advantage of all the innovations that are happening in the model world without kind of waiting for kind of retraining your entire agentic layer. That's, I think, will be the kind of the core architecture going forward, however you implement it.
Well, thank you, esteemed panelists. I learned a ton, and I'm really excited to have a deep conversation today within this great campus about enterprise AI. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.